everyone. This evening I want to share with you this story of mine. It happened less than a year ago in the Metro of Canada. I came here to study a year and a half ago, and the most economical way to get around is by metro. I remember that time I had to attend a science convention in the afternoon. My attendance was mandatory because my university was participating. The place was very far from where I rented, and I was still learning how to navigate that enormous city. So, I left much earlier than the convention start time to make sure I arrived on time. I arrived at the metro and started to figure out which line I needed to take, as there are several lines. I took one, but I realized after boarding that we were moving in the opposite direction of what my map on the phone indicated. I was very stressed because now I was definitely going to be late. I got off at the next station and went straight to the map to orient myself and take the correct train, but I didn't understand it much. I was very confused and I couldn't hide my stressed and anxious expression. At that moment, a very kind and smiling elderly lady approached me and asked if I needed help. I told her yes, and explained where I needed to go to see if she could tell me where to take the train. She, very kindly and smiling all the time, took my arm and said, "I will tell you where it is." I went with her because how could I distrust a kind and smiling elderly lady? I felt a lot of nostalgia at the same time because I hadn't made many friends yet and missed my mother and grandmother a lot. Finally, I felt accompanied after so long. We walked through the endless corridors of the station. The lady didn't speak. She just kept smiling the whole time. I began to realize that the more we walked, the more Suddenly, we arrived at a station that seemed out of service, rather abandoned. It was almost entirely dark, and the place smelled terrible. By that point, I suspected something was wrong. I started to feel scared but didn't know how to get away. She had me by the arm and I was afraid to pull away in case she did something to me because I was very small in build, and she seemed in good shape still. We stopped in front of the tracks. I knew the metro would never pass through there. It was obvious that the station had been out of service for years. The lady walked towards the edge with that smile that had now become macabre. My heart was pounding fast. I felt the adrenaline of the moment. I had to run away and get to safety, but I was thinking about how to do it and waiting for the perfect moment while trying to act normal, although inside fear consumed my whole body. I think she was enjoying it. I asked her how long it would take for the metro to arrive. She replied, "Very soon. We will leave here." Tell me, how would you react to that answer? It was the most disturbing and macabre thing she could have said in that situation. I was about to pull my arm and run away, when suddenly, a man's voice sounded in the distance. "Hey, what are you doing here? It's forbidden to enter," he shouted as he approached and shone his flashlight on us. It was a guard, the man who probably saved my life. I shouted for him to help me. He approached me asking what was happening and why I needed help. I turned to my side and the lady was no longer there, but I still felt her hand gripping my arm. I screamed and started running towards the guard. I stopped feeling that hand gripping me, and I told him everything that had happened as we walked towards the exit. But the man told me that he never saw anyone beside me, that since he saw me, I was standing alone in front of the tracks. The man was very kind because I was crying, extremely nervous and very scared. He let me go and advised me never to trust strangers, especially as a foreigner, because many people could take advantage of that. I was alone in an unfamiliar country. I don't know if he believed me or not. The truth is, I didn't care anymore. I was very scared and just wanted to return to the place where I rented. I didn't attend the convention and had problems with the professor who organized it, but nothing could distress or scare me more than what had happened. Later, when I made friends at the university, I told them what had happened to me, and they told me about several strange things that had happened to them at that station too. It seems very strange things happen there, and I was unlucky enough to experience them. Have a good evening, everyone, and thank you for listening to my story. Hello, My name is Fernando Azua, and what I am about to tell you happened to me on Line 3 of the Mexico City Metro some time ago, when I went there to study for a semester as an exchange student. I was new there, and to be honest, it was very difficult for me to adapt. I come from a small town, and arriving in that immense city where I had to cross almost the entire city to get to the university was overwhelming. At first I enjoyed it, so I opted to always travel by metro since it was the fastest way to get around. One morning around 5 a.m., I arrived at the station and boarded the train as soon as it arrived. The metro was somewhat empty. In fact, in the car I boarded, there were only 5 people. People got on and off as we passed through the stations, but there was one occasion when I was left completely alone in the car. Well, there was a man at the other end of the car, but he was a homeless man who spent the entire time talking to himself. It was clear he wasn't mentally well. The metro continued, and I still had 4 more stations to go before reaching my destination. I was calm since there was still time before my class. Everything was fine until that man started shouting at me, "Don't look at them, close your eyes, just close them and don't open them for anything." I didn't know what he was talking about, but I didn't pay attention because I knew he wasn't right in the head. But then, as we were crossing a long, dark tunnel, I thought of looking out the windows. I swear I could see a bunch of large, round eyes staring from the darkness. I couldn't see their bodies or faces. The only thing that stood out were their large, glowing eyes. The metro wasn't going very fast because we were close to the next station. That's how I could observe them clearly, and it terrified me, filling my body with fear. Those weren't people. Their eyes were not like ours. For starters, they were enormous, without eyelashes, and completely round. The strangest thing I've ever seen in my life. While this was happening, the man had his eyes closed and kept shouting, "Don't look at them. Just close your eyes and don't look at them. They will come after you." Completely confused and scared, I decided to get off at the next station and take a taxi to the university. I couldn't concentrate in my classes all day because I kept thinking about it. Hours passed and it was time to leave. Some classmates invited me to dinner because it was one of their birthdays. Honestly, I didn't feel like going. I was still shaken by what had happened that morning. But I agreed to go with them because I didn't have any friends in the city yet. I thought it would be a good idea to make new friends, so I wouldn't feel so alone. We were at the restaurant for a few hours, but night fell. One of them offered to drive me to my apartment since he had a car, but I told him no because I lived on the other side of the city, and I was embarrassed as I had just met him. I didn't want to be a burden. So I had to take the metro again, even though I was afraid to take a taxi at that hour, knowing they were also unsafe. I walked to the nearby metro station and waited for the train. It was around 11 p.m., and there were few people in the area. I was looking at the map because I was on a different line that I didn't know, and I didn't know which train to take to get to my apartment. Suddenly I saw the same man, the homeless man who had been in the same car as me that morning. "Get out of here, they're coming for you," he said to me. I just walked away from him because I knew he wasn't well. But when I got on the metro, I felt a very strange sensation, like a premonition. Although I brushed it off, thinking I was just being paranoid because of what the man had said and what I had seen in the morning, something told me to get out of there. The car was empty. It was just me. So I decided to get up from my seat and run out before the metro doors closed. I barely made it out, but I did it. Once outside, I felt relieved for having gotten out. I told myself it was all nonsense, so I stayed there waiting for the next metro. Suddenly, we heard over the loudspeakers that there was a delay because the last car of the metro that had just left had detached from the rest of the train, stranding it in the middle of the tunnel. It would take time to move it from there. I didn't know if it was luck, my intuition, or that homeless man who saved me. It took them an hour to get there and move it out of the way. After that, they closed the station, saying they found that car with inexplicable damages. My heart was racing and I couldn't stop trembling because I could have been there. I could have been the only victim. They never said what caused such a thing because I don't think they knew either. Sometimes life gives you a second chance, or at least that's how I saw it. I never took the metro again for the rest of my time there. I decided to move to an apartment near the university, and although it was much more expensive, I didn't want to set foot in any metro station ever again. I'll never know what those things that watched me from the darkness of the tunnels were, but I have no doubt they caused that accident, thinking I was inside. Hello everyone, my name is Jesus. I want to share something that happened to me on the Los Angeles subway. I've been living here for years, and at first, the subway and the bus were my means of transportation because I didn't have enough money to buy a car. I used to go to and from work by transferring across several subway lines in this city. I got off work at 10:30 p.m. since I was a waiter at a restaurant, and sometimes I had to close up, so I'd arrive at the station almost at 11 p.m. Nothing strange or out of the ordinary had ever happened to me in this city. There are many homeless people here who shelter from the cold in the subway until the stations close, and sometimes they cause a commotion because almost all of them use substances. But what happened that night far exceeded anything like that. That night I had to close the place. I walked to the station and entered normally. There were very few people when my train arrived, and I boarded. I noticed there were only 3 other people besides me. I sat down and waited for the subway to move. At that moment, a woman entered with a baby in her arms, wrapped in a blanket. The doors closed, and the subway started moving. But we all had the same expression of disgust, because as soon as that woman got on, the place started to fill with a horrible, putrid smell. It wasn't the smell of a homeless person who couldn't bathe. I recognized that smell. This was more like something rotting, unbearable. The people with me in the car covered their noses with their hands or sweaters, and the woman just looked at all of us one by one. She looked very pale, and her clothes were very worn out. But what was most concerning was that she had a baby in her arms, or so it seemed. The woman was standing holding onto a pole with one hand and carrying the baby in the other arm, but she decided to sit next to a lady. When she did, the lady started screaming in terror and ran towards where the rest of us were. The lady kept screaming, "That woman has a dead baby." A man got up from his seat to check, while the woman sat there without any expression. She didn't even try to cover the baby when she saw the lady's reaction. She let the man approach and see, and by the look on his face, he confirmed everything. The man moved away from her while another young man who was with us asked what was happening, and the man told him. The young man looked terrified, took out his cell phone, and called the police to report the woman. But suddenly, out of nowhere, while the subway was moving and we were still in a tunnel, the woman left the baby's body on the seat and then, with immense strength, opened the back doors and jumped onto the tracks. The subway alarm started sounding, so the driver began to slow down gradually. I watched everything from my seat, stunned. I was in shock from everything that was happening. It seemed unreal. I had just witnessed someone practically take their own life after leaving a small, putrid body on the seat. We arrived at the next station, where police officers were already waiting. They made everyone get off except for us because they needed to take our statements. While each of us gave our version of what happened, there were guards in the tunnel looking for the woman's body because it was impossible for her to have survived. The subway was moving too fast, and if she was alive, she had to be very badly injured. But they found no one. They came out and said they had searched the tunnel tracks with many flashlights and even a police dog, but there were no remains of anyone there. So they took our statements again because we were all suspects, given that there was a dead child in our possession. It was very difficult for me because I had just received residency in this country, and it was at risk since I was a suspect, just like the other 3 people with me. They held us all night until an officer told me I could go since they had apparently reviewed the station cameras. The footage showed the woman entering the car with the baby, but never showed her leaving the tunnel. She simply disappeared in there because they still couldn't find her. And if she had miraculously survived, She had to be there because she never appeared leaving on any camera. I never knew more about the matter. I didn't know who that poor baby was, or who that strange woman was, or what happened to her. But I did know they never found her, and there were many theories that she was actually dead too, but she wanted to leave her baby in a safe place so she could move on. I know my story is very intense, but I wanted to share it with all of you because I always had that doubt about what happened. Hello, community. I want to share this story with all of you, although I prefer to do it anonymously. It happened to me one night while I was traveling online to the subway. I have to start by saying that I almost never use the subway since I have a car and I always drive it, especially back then when I had my 6-month-old baby. But that day, I had an appointment with the pediatrician, and my car just wouldn't start. I spent a long time trying to get it to start, but it was getting late and I didn't have anyone available to ask for a ride. The only quick option was to take the subway because if I called a taxi or Uber, we wouldn't make it on time due to traffic. We went to the appointment, and everything was normal. It was a bit uncomfortable traveling with a baby in my arms on the subway, but everything went fine. However, on the way back, something terrifying happened. The scariest thing I've experienced to this day. And yes, I mean something paranormal. I decided to take the subway again because it was already night, and I was scared to take a taxi at that hour, especially with my baby in my arms. I went down to the station and waited for the train to arrive. My baby was awake but very calm. In general, she was always very calm and only cried when she was hungry or in pain. The subway arrived and I got on. It was around 8 p.m., so the subway was packed. I saw at the back that a young man was lying down, occupying 2 seats. So I went over there before the subway started moving and asked the young man to please get up so I could sit with my baby. But he ignored me and didn't move at all. An older man behind him tried to wake him up by shaking him, but the young man kept pretending to be asleep and didn't move. The older man and I looked annoyed. Then, the man stood up and offered me his seat. He stood because the young man never moved. I need to make a small parenthesis to mention that my baby started crying from the moment I spoke to the young man and didn't stop crying until we got off the train. When I reached my stop, the young man was still lying in the same position, occupying 2 seats. I got off the subway and was about to walk towards the exit when something happened that gave me such a scare that it took me a long time to recover. While I was walking, the same young man who had stayed on the subway car crossed my path. The same one who had supposedly been asleep the whole time. I knew it was him because he had the same face, hair, and distinctive rocker attire. I was stunned, staring at him without blinking. He looked distressed and desperate, trying to ask for my help, and although he couldn't speak, I could read his lips saying, "Help me." I couldn't say anything. I turned around and ran to where a guard was standing and told her that there was a young man on the train that had just left who needed help. While I was explaining, I looked back, but the young man was no longer there. She asked me what was wrong with the boy or why he needed help. I seemed crazy, not knowing what to say. The only thing I could think to say was that he was a ghost. She said she would call on the radio to send help to the next station. She asked me which car he was in, and I told her it was the third to last one. She started calling on the radio. I stayed there because I couldn't leave without knowing what was happening. I stayed with the guard the whole time, who was very kind to me and my baby because she saw how anxious I was. I don't know how many minutes passed when someone on the other end of the radio said, "The young man is dead." My heart was beating very fast and I just started crying. The guard asked how long he had been there, but the other guard replied that he didn't know, that he was lying on the seats, and that the authorities were on their way. He couldn't tell how long he had been dead. I went home with my baby in my arms, who wouldn't stop crying, and I couldn't either. I couldn't believe what had happened to me, specifically to me. The young man asked me for help, so that someone would notice his body and realize he was no longer alive. Days later, I found out from the newspaper that the young man had ingested two substances, and mixing them with alcohol caused his death while he was on the subway, falling asleep and never waking up again. I know I'm not the only one this has happened to, even though my family doesn't believe me, but I know many of you do.